Okay, I think we're going to get started now. Welcome, everyone. My name is Fred Larson. I'm the president of the National Institute of Social Sciences, and I'd like to welcome you here today to our inaugural webinar for 2021. With us today, we've got a terrific topic and some terrific panelists, so I'm really excited about this and looking forward to sharing it with you. This is Diversity in Cultural Institutions, Challenge and Response. I'll just go through very quickly, give you some logistics about what's happening. To the extent anybody doesn't already know this on Zoom, welcome, but you're probably familiar. As audience members, you are on mute by default. You do have access to the Q&A function, which is down near the bottom of your screen typically, where you can submit questions. We will probably try and take some of those questions as we approach the end of the seminar, or end of the forum. We are recording this forum, so to the extent you miss any of it or want to go back and watch it again, it will be available a few days after the event. We are the National Institute of Social Sciences, and we are sponsoring this forum. We are a congressionally chartered, not-for-profit association who seeks to understand and improve our world through the study and discussion of vital societal issues. We honor outstanding individuals who've made significant contributions to society. We offer direct financial support to scholars in social science, and we offer our members to gather together with experts an opportunity to discuss issues of urgent and lasting concern. I invite you to go check out our website if you'd like to learn more. There's plenty of material there. With us today, as I mentioned, we've got a terrific panel. I'll go through very briefly, and then we'll turn quickly to them because they're the stars of the show. Starting alphabetically, we have Tom Hill. Tom Hill is a longstanding finance executive based out of New York City, but more importantly, for the point of this perspective, he is very, very intimately tied into the art world and has been for many, many years. He is a trustee of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Guggenheim Museum. He's also on the executive committee of the High Line and the founder of the Hill Art Foundation, a free art museum in Chelsea, New York City. Welcome, Tom. Also with us, we have Kate Markert, who's the executive director of the Hillwood Estate Museum and Garden, a very interesting institution, which was originally the estate of Marjorie Meriwether Post and is now a public museum, garden, and estate. Also, we have Mary Pat Matheson, who's the director of the Atlanta Botanical Garden. She has been their CEO since 2002 and has been doing a lot of very interesting things there, very large public facility. Somewhat different angle than the museum, but very, very interesting from the point of view of the issues that she faces there. And then finally, we have Margaret Morton, who's the Director of Creativity and Free Expression at the Ford Foundation, and also has a history of being a Deputy Commissioner at the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, which is the largest municipal funder of the arts and culture in the United States. So welcome, everyone. I would love to get everybody going into the conversation and happy to get that started if I may. So again, thank you for joining. I guess what I'd like to do is, Margaret, if I can put you on the spot, because you're sitting somewhat on the side here looking over this, and you've got an experience of looking at it maybe with an eagle eye as to what should be done in the terms of diversity across cultural institutions. How do you sort of frame the issues and challenges?
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with the group, and I appreciate you including me, Frederick. Thank you. You know, I bring the perspective of leading the creative portfolio at the Ford Foundation. Before that, I was with the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, which New York City has a vast arts and cultural sector, which is almost reflective of the larger country. There are over 1,300 arts and cultural organizations in the city. I would say, you know, we believe at Ford that sort of art and narratives really play a role in defining culture, in defining civic life, and really who we are. And we link this. Ford has supported the arts historically, but we look today as art and narratives is very important to, it's linked to inequality. Which is our mission. We work throughout the globe And we see the same conditions that affect people throughout the world. And we really try to focus on entrenched cultural narratives. We use the power of the arts, journalism, and film to bring new narratives into the landscape, because we've had a very rich history investing in arts organizations, going back to a great leader, McNeil Lowry, between 57 and probably 76. Ford helped to build the regional theaters in this country. It helped to build the orchestras in this country, and really supported and was very innovative in how it invested in the arts. However, during the 20th century, the narratives and those who decided on the arts, those curators, those leaders, and mostly those artists were European-centered, male, mostly from the global north, not representing the global south. So we feel an obligation to try to help shift that by investing and empowering new narratives, not only by artists of color and women and artists from the global south, but also helping institutions that are representing those new narratives. So I'll stop there. That's a bit of our strategy and how we're investing today in the arts, journalism, and film as well.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Margaret. Mary Pat, if I can turn to you, tell us a little bit about what you're doing at the Botanical Garden down there. Sort of how do you frame this issue? How do you address this every day? And how do you try and move your institution to deal with these challenges?
Thank you, Fred. First, it's just great to be here with all of you. Nice to meet you all virtually. And I love being included because botanical gardens are different than the art museums that some of you represent, but very important in the cultural world that we live in today. And we sit at the center of Atlanta, and we're the largest botanical garden in the southeastern United States. And our visitor base in the good days, 2019, was just over 800,000 people a year, so significant. And I think gardens, with respect to diversity, on some level, are in an easier, better position to address diversity in terms of audience and visitors. We're a museum without walls. So you can see what we call the earth goddess behind my shoulder here. She's one of our iconic pieces in the garden. And I think not having to go up grand staircases and into a treasured place, but something that's open and green and natural, it's easier to get people in our community to come and enjoy the garden. But we've worked hard over the last decade to truly diversify our audience and have made great strides. And the importance is, it's just so relevant and essential in a city like Atlanta that's such a diverse community, has such a rich history with civil rights, and the African-American community is so important here in Atlanta. So we've really worked hard to diversify our audience. We're about 52% are visitors, people of color, and oddly, and in some way, in a really wonderful way, during COVID, we are one of the few cultural institutions that is truly thriving. And it's because it's a safe place to come. Being outdoors is an easier thing for people to do and feel safe. And it's just enriched the audience that we had before it's just amplified our diversity in such a remarkable way. And particularly because our tourists are not coming here, people locally who might not have been here before are venturing in, and we're reaching much more deeply into the communities that we've done in the past. But some of the issues that I think we all have to deal with and address are around equity, involve the cost of getting into our institutions. And we're looking at different ways of addressing that, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of that later today. But we're an important part of this community. The community is an important part of the garden, And we're all on a journey right now, and we're on a journey that is only going to enrich our communities and our organizations in a much broader and better way now and in the future.
That's great. Kate, if I could turn to you, you're the director of a very interesting institution. You're somewhat of a hybrid, aren't you? You're an estate, you're a museum, and you're gardens. What are the challenges you face, and sort of what are the things how do you see that progressing? There you go.
Sorry.
No problem.
I am with Mary Pat, a member of the Directors of Large Gardens. As well, I'm a member of the Association of Art Museum Directors, and there may be only one or two of us who are in that position that have sort of one foot in each camp, if you will. And I think Mary Pat is quite right that the garden part of the Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens is maybe the easier part for, people to feel welcome and come in and so forth. I would also say that I do think this time during COVID, when we've done so much virtual programming, we have really seen much more diversity in the virtual programs. And I think if there have been studies that recently, just through the COVID period, that have revealed that people of color tend to feel more comfortable just coming in on a virtual experience because there are fewer barriers in some ways. Of course, all of our virtual programming is free, and so it's easy. It's very easy to drop in. We are very much hoping that the experience that people have had meeting us virtually will make them more comfortable coming when they can actually come, really. And I will say very dramatically, we have tried to have the DC public schools come, and bring kids and so forth, come to Hillwood. We've previously not had much success. With virtual programming, we've had over 2,000 DC public school kids. And I am so excited and thrilled by that. Of course, my numbers and Mary Pat's have never met. I mean, in the before times, we had 85,000 visitors. And so it's a different scale than Mary Pat works on. So for us, 2,000 kids in the DC public schools is absolutely thrilling. And we very much hope that means they'll feel comfortable coming back, bringing their families, and really understanding that they are very welcome here, that we want a very broad and diverse audience. And I will say, it simply makes us all stronger. Going back to Margaret talking about the narratives, I couldn't agree with you more. And I can certainly talk about, what we're doing in, with the narratives and so forth in the collection, if we get to that point. But diversity only makes us stronger. It only makes us more relevant. It only helps us, move into the future. It's not about, it's the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. It's what's going to make you relevant going forward.
That's great. That's great. Tom, then, if I can turn to you, you also have a very interesting perspective because in some respects, you're straddling quite the great divide. You have a seat on the board of trustees of two of the grand old damn museums of New York City, the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Guggenheim, which are both world famous. And yet you're also on the executive committee of the High Line, which is a public urban park, a very interesting story of creation and so forth. And you're creator of your own free admission art foundation. How do you see these issues playing out? Is it similar at different scales? Is it completely different sets of problems? How do you think about these issues?
Well, Fred, unlike the other participants on this panel who represent an institution, I would say I'm a product of New York City. I grew up there. I've watched New York evolve in the 50s, 60s, to where it is today. It's the most diverse city in the world. Over 100 languages are spoken, and every cultural institution in New York City is trying to come to terms with how to create an experience for everyone in the city. Now, if you're charging $25 for admission, that eliminates a whole bunch of potential people. And the Metropolitan Museum, when I was first introduced, my mother took me there when I was 6, and just climbing up those stairs, pretty intimidating. And, I wasn't able to get into the Frick until I was 12 because they have a rule on age. They discriminate based on age. So, having watched New York try to cope with essentially how to be relevant and how to create great experiences, I think we can learn a lot from how New York City has adapted. And New York has been the leader in terms of arts outside. And so sculpture on Park Avenue, sculpture in Central Park, sculpture, on an island, on the way to Coney, on the way of the Statue of Liberty. And New York has pioneered this accessibility. And, when the Museum of Modern Art decided to do the Doug Aitken, where you could walk by the Modern and you could see the Doug Aitken, similar to what we did at the Hirshhorn when I was chairman of the Hirshhorn, which is having on the outside, during the spring and summer for people walking on the Mall, tens of millions of people walk on the Mall every year, but to see I Only Have Eyes for You with music playing in the evening as the sun was setting, amazing accessibility. So going back to Margaret's point about a narrative, I've always believed that culture and governments and progress in terms of whether it's in democracies or in other countries, changes that, and science too, are all related. I happen to work for a computer software company that manages money with 220 PhDs, all trying to figure out based on data what the future will be. And all of these things are connected. So I think it's critical, at moments like this. And I think over the last year, it's not just the pandemic, it's what we have witnessed across this country in terms of violence, in terms of, I would say, really overt actions that bring to bear not only inequalities, but how structurally we've got a lot of problems. That these are great moments for every cultural institution to step back and say, well, let's, try to ask some really tough questions about, maybe our history, about how we've been doing things, how we could be doing things better. And it starts with, I think, making people feel comfortable, and then making the experience accessible. So let me pause there, because I think everyone is grappling with this in their own way. And, we have different cities represented here. Margaret and I share a love of New York. And certainly New York is trying. And I would say, we've got, as in most government institutions, room for improvement.
Well, thank you, Tom. Yeah, that raises sort of an interesting dimension of this, because to date we've sort of been talking a lot about diversity and outreach and diversity in audience and trying to improve that. There's another aspect of diversity, of course, which is the diversity of staffing, right? That all of you are institutions who hire and employ individuals in various roles, all the way from humble ticket takers, if you will, all the way up to administrators, curators, et cetera. And as I read it, certainly, Andrew Melon has done a number of surveys on this in terms of employment in the arts, and clearly it seems to be improving, but it's certainly not necessarily at the stages we want to get to. I guess, I would open this up to the panel as to how do you think that, impacts your mission? What can you do to address that? How do you sort of improve the staffing aspect of the diversity equation?
Well, I'm happy to talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
We have really focused on trying to be sure that in the recruitment for new staff positions, that not new staff positions, but any, staff vacancies, especially at the professional level, that we are now, totally blind in recruitment. We have a wonderful head of human resources who is a crackerjack recruiter, knows where to place ads, how to write the ads, and she does all the screening, so that trying to eliminate any of this unconscious bias that might creep in. And I will say the last 3 professional positions that we've hired have been people of color. And that is simply because they were the best candidates. It wasn't, we decided we were going to go out, these were the best candidates. And I really feel that having a better way to recruit, to eliminate this unconscious bias, is going to help us. I mean, this whole idea that, there aren't people out there is not correct. I mean, they are there. You just need to open your eyes and be able to recruit them in a way that, you're not, and I do think it's unconscious bias. I don't think anybody, I think most of people that are in our organizations are, well-meaning and all of that sort of thing, but you have to go about it in a very deliberate way to eliminate that. And then, it's really amazing how it can happen.
Mary Pat, did you have something on that?
I did. I'd add to that. I agree with that. It was very interesting. We were interviewing someone today for our vice president of HR, and she works for a financial institution, and talked about, blind applications and how great it's been. But then talked about how it's leaked in the organization and people still peak. And so we all have to get better and do better at this. And in our field, because we're in a diverse city, we do very well with diversity on our staff, but we don't do as well in the, C-suite and upper level management. And we don't do as well in the curatorial, horticulture, and plant conservation side. And part of that is the history of the field, that there aren't that many diverse students who come up through horticulture or taxonomy and plant biology. And so what we're doing is looking at that situation with universities. So Spelman is just a remarkable college university here in Atlanta, all women's African-American school. And we've partnered with them to work with some of their biology students to learn about plant conservation through internship programs that are paid internships, so that we can get students, young, brilliant African-American women, into our field to learn about, why would you care about plants, and then why do you care that they're disappearing? And we're doing that with Georgia State and even Georgia Tech and UGA, and we're really bringing in many diverse candidates and students in the internship programs, so that we can focus today on what our staff looks like, but we're also investing in what the future looks like. And I think for all of us, that's an area that we should be exploring, because there's so many opportunities and there's so many bright students. I actually fear that in the future, we're going to be, as nonprofits, worried about where the men are coming from. I'm sure we can all say that our nonprofits are getting to be, what Margaret's shaking her head, 80% women. And
Right.
That may be one of our issues in the future. So diversity isn't just about people of color and people who are gay or lesbian or transgender. Diversity is everything, and we need to look at it through that lens. But I do think men are going to be a problem in the future. I know that's shocking,
Yeah.
Fred.
Some
Yeah.
may say we've been a problem for a long time, but yes, I hear what you're saying. Yes, Margaret.
Thank you, Mary Pat. I would just add a couple of things that are happening in philanthropy to really target and help kind of accelerate those efforts by museums. That Melon survey wasn't a surprise, but it was a wake-up call, and it really gave it really just affirmed what we really all knew. In 2015 and in 2018, as you said, there was not an appreciable change. A couple of initiatives. One is the Diversifying Art Museum Leadership Initiative that our president at Ford took with the Walton Foundation, investing about $6 million into museums for best practices that either built out that curatorial pipeline that Mary Pat talked about, or the executive leadership, that C-suite. And we've been really satisfied with the results of that over the last 3 years, and looking now at how to possibly build on that in a smart way. We've also invested with Melon Foundation and with Alice Walton Foundation in the American Alliance of Museums Facing Change program. The American Alliance of Museums, as we know, gives certification to museums across the country. They have focused on helping to ensure that there's DEI training that's actively happening across a landscape of kind of selected regions. They're also working on helping board recruitment, which is a real challenge, particularly in more rural areas. And they are trying to create a digital database that could be a model for sourcing names for diverse leaders. Finally, our president did help invest in near the Department of Cultural Affairs research in 2016 that looked at the landscape of diversity among both boards and executive staff. I have to say that work in New York City was heard throughout the country and really started a conversation more broadly. Again, sort of New York City setting the stage. Just wanted to mention a few of those things. And Tom, the High Line is one of my favorite places because it is a public park now, and because of public art, which I think is the most democratic gesture that we can make.
Well, and I have to say, Darren Walker has been critical to the success of the High Line. So we owe a great deal to his leadership and vision. I'd like to, switch around a little bit and talk about how strategic plans are absolutely critical in terms of results. And at the Metropolitan Museum and at the Guggenheim and also at the High Line, as well as all the other cultural institutions I'm involved with, it's a truism, but you drive outcomes by what you measure. And if you don't have a really clear idea of what you have, then you can't, as part of your strategic plan, say, oh, I'd like to have something different. And so every institution that I'm a part of over the last year has taken a really serious look at what they have. And they said, oh my gosh, now that we've analyzed this, it doesn't measure up in terms of a whole bunch of standards and measurements. And so we've now baked in, very specific changes that are necessary. And, the outcomes are being driven by process. And so you might have seen that we recruited probably the most senior and accomplished woman Naomi Beckwith, to the Guggenheim to be, essentially our head of all curating. And, the shows that she had done in Chicago are unbelievable, and her relationships with these artists that we have been collecting, but now that will accelerate it. So we said, we've got a big hole, we got to fill that hole. And once you've decided what the goal is, you can act, and then everyone is focused, and it's amazing what you can get done in very short periods of time. So the key now is, to really keep the momentum that has been generated over the last year, and then to actually have accountability, because what people tend to do is focus, and then we say, well, we're on to the next thing, but there now has to be continuous focus and continuous improvement. And I'm very optimistic that now the changes that have been baked into 2020 and 2021 will be codified over the next 5 and 10 years. And it won't be a rush right now, and then essentially, a year, 2 years from now, there will be less focus. I think there is continuing focus because this has become so important.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. And I'm very big on strategic plans. I've written a book with Gail Lord about strategic planning for cultural organizations, so I 100% believe in it. And we have baked that in, as you say, on both the board and the staff level. So we have board leadership that's very, very committed to DEAI and is really on fire for it, which is great. And I agree that you achieve what you measure and what you say you're going to do, and it's very important to do that. The other thing I would say is that there is such enthusiasm on the staff level. The staff is not going to let this slide. We have what we call the culture committee, that is the group that's the staff that is focused on DEAI. And they are asking the hard questions, and they are demanding that things change in a very positive direction. So I too am feeling, hopeful that we can continue to make positive change. And I really do think both the board and staff are committed to it, and they will, make sure that it continues to happen.
Yeah.
Speaking of, go ahead, Margaret, please.
Yeah, I would just, staff is really key. I mean, I think we have been seeing over the last couple of years a real change in the culture of, on the diversity issue, on the, old forms of power, but particularly during the pandemic.
Yes.
And the racial reckoning. We've seen staff, both Black and white together, really assert themselves.
Yes.
In challenging maybe old ways that organizations were trying to bring about diversity, really kind of speaking truth to power. We've seen a lot of Black artists form sort of new power coalitions to really challenge kind of old ways of doing business. We saw it on Broadway. There were a group of Broadway artists led by Audra McDonald who are challenging Broadway and the producers and really the lack of diversity in Broadway. But we've seen it across art museums and also performing arts as well. But seeing the staff is really, to me, gives me great hope that they're kind of just saying, we need to make change now rather than talking a lot about it. So to your point about, strategic planning and really, really being accountable for the changes that are happening, it's great.
I know when we spoke earlier, Mary Pat, you had mentioned that you actually get pretty good statistics on the diversity of your visitor groups. And, you know, it's obviously a very large flow of visitors get there. You're clearly spending time and attention, but going to Tom's point that you can't actually manage something unless you can measure it. You know, how does that help you? What are the challenges involved? You know, has it made a material difference the way you think and plan?
Oh, absolutely. You know, we're all going to sing the same song about strategic planning. It's so essential to know where you're going in order to get there. And we've done that, you know, as long as I've been here and long before. But, you know, we've been working on diversity for a while, but I would say that a concerted effort for the last 10 years. And when I arrived here 18 years ago, this was a white, wealthy garden. It was the little playground of what people in, no offense to anyone who's from Buckhead, but you know, the wealthy enclave of Atlanta. And the board, to their credit, brought me in because I'm known for programming and both breaking open the doors for everybody. I want the zoo's audience. Zoos are so diverse. We should have a zoo leader here because they have broken barriers long ago. And I guess because everyone loves pandas, but I want the zoo audience, I want everyone. And we've really worked hard at that, with the exception of the financial equity, which we could talk about. I hope we talk about that at some point. But we started by understanding the data. And, you know, we run nonprofits and we tend to be nonprofit warm and fuzzy leaders, and we don't always use the information and the data that corporations use. And we are of the mind that if every mall in America knows where you live and what store you're going in and all the information about your demographics by the information on your cell phone, and it's legal in this country, that there's no reason why a nonprofit can't do the same. So we get our consumer data right from the cell phone data companies. We work with a company, Alexander Babbage, here in Atlanta, but they do work all over the United States, and they do a lot of work in New York. In fact, I know the Whitney is one of their clients. And it's aggregated data, but we can know exactly where our visitors coming from. And that informs us as to who's not coming, how do we reach into that part of the community, and where do you invest your marketing dollars? So we've been very savvy at where we invest our marketing dollars. As for instance, two of our malls here, this is all pre-pandemic, because, you know, not many people go to malls right now, but back in the day, we do a big holiday light show, and we really believe that that was a great way to continue to diversify our audience, because everyone wants to see lights during the holidays. And it's not a religious light show, it's just a beautiful, very urban chic light show. So we invest a lot of money at Lenox Mall here because it is probably one of the most diverse malls in America. And we just owned sections of that mall over the food court for 3 years. And we could just see the diversity, particularly our African-American audience, climb over that 3-year period. And so it's about, where do you get your data, following your data on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis, using the data to inform your marketing decisions. And then I think Kate mentioned that people need to feel welcome. And you're not going to feel welcome if no one looks like you. And that goes to the staffing issue. You know, we have to have people who look like our audience, and we need to make sure everyone is welcoming and inclusive. And I think where we don't do as well is language. And none of us have talked about that as another barrier, but it is. When we live in a global community, and we may not have as many languages as New York and Atlanta, but we have a lot. And we do have language barriers, which would be an interesting thing for us to really look at in the future. But we use data, and we learn from what businesses do to do a better job as a nonprofit. And it's worked beautifully for us. Always more to do, but the other thing, you know, we used to have dress codes or standards, you know, and realized pretty quickly, especially with COVID, when we were having these young, beautiful African-American couples come, and they would have their midriff showing, and sometimes sheer blouses and things that in the past we were like, please go put on a jacket. Forget it. Forget it. I mean, young people are excited to get dressed up in the middle of COVID and come to the garden as though they're going to a club with their loved one, and we embrace that. So I can tell you, and this is one of our board members is the new CEO of UPS. And if you followed Carol Tomei, she got there in June. And I think I'm not going to get in trouble for telling this story. She did a survey of their employees to see whether they would recommend working there. And it was less than 50%. And so they looked at what the barriers were in part. And one of the barriers particularly was facial hair for men and hairstyles and all of that. And they got rid of that. And they're already seeing their employee morale come up, and they've already been a very diverse company. But we all have a lot to do, and there's so many layers to it. But every day we learn something, and every day we get better.
That's great. Let's turn now to the issue you just mentioned, Mary Pat, in passing, and which others have mentioned in passing as well, which is equity. I think this is one of the interesting challenges. I looked at the Melon Foundation's survey of the humanities in American life in 2019. Don't worry about, hopefully you can still hear me. My picture will come back on in a minute. But the point there is, what was interesting to me is that they did a survey of this group as to how frequently did you often or very often in the previous 12 months visit an art museum festival or art appreciation event, or that was one category. Another was visited a history museum or historic site. The interesting thing is, from the point of view of racial demographics, the history museum visiting was the same. There was no difference among any groups as people visiting history museums or history sites. However, interesting enough, people of color visited art museums, festivals, and appreciation events at approximately 50% higher rates than did people who are identified as white, non-Hispanic. So I thought that was a pretty interesting thing there, and just in terms of the audience receptivity. But the kicker here is, of course, that the people who visited the most in all museums and all events were the highly educated and the wealthy. And clearly we have a range of financial models here in all of your institutions. Some of them charge substantial entrance fees, or at least have stickers of financial interest fees. Some are free. How do we reverse that? How do we fix that? How do we make that work so that everybody can enjoy these cultural institutions? I'll open that up to anybody who's interested in answering.
I feel like I've just been monopolizing, but I'll jump into that one. Number one, we have to recognize that we cannot run our institutions on thin air. In Atlanta, we don't have what you have in New York. We don't have any state or any significant public investment in arts and culture, and not in the capital side nor on the operating side. So that alone tends to make us more expensive. And one thing we have to be careful is not assume that people of color don't have wealth, because they do, and we demonstrate that every day. But then it's, how do you reach that next echelon? And last year, just before COVID hit, we did a free week and we did it because one of our donors, Mrs. Ann Cox Chambers, had passed away just at about 100 years old. And she's also a big supporter of New York arts. And her family wanted to do a free week on her behalf. And we were naive and said, of course we'll do that. And we got blasted. We had 40,000 people on the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of that week. We shut down traffic all over Midtown Atlanta, and our neighbors hated us for it. So we learned that people want to come, and we of course knew that price can be a barrier. But when we looked at the analytics, a lot of those people were perfectly capable of paying admission. So we're looking at how do we go beyond our borders, and certainly working with the Atlanta public school system and making sure that every child, every kindergarten, except for COVID time, gets to come to the garden every year, and that's on us. And we do things like give away free tickets, and we work with our partners in social services to give the tickets away, because they're better connected to the communities of need. And the reason we do that is because it goes back to that welcome and invitation and feeling like they'll really use the tickets. If the Latin American Association gives the tickets to people in their community, they're going to use them. If we just mail them out and they don't know us, it's unlikely that they'll use them. So I think we have to reach beyond our borders. We have to work with our partners in the community. And I think partners with social services is a natural in my opinion. And then when and if we can do some free activities for people, try to target it so that people who can least afford it are the ones who actually come. But there's no easy solution to that one, Fred.
Yeah, I just have to jump in here, Mary Pat. It's the whole, we did, I will back up by saying Hillwood is within a neighborhood and we are a quote non-conforming use in terms of zoning. So if our neighbors are unhappy, they can shut us down. So I have to be sure my neighbors are not unhappy with all of our neighbors. And those are the people that are within 200 feet of the edge of the of Hillwood, have my cell number. So if they're unhappy, believe me, I hear from them. But so we did try as part of the Smithsonian once we did, the Smithsonian Free Day, and we cannot do that. We cannot do that because it's too much traffic on the road, and oh, it was a nightmare. So I that is, like Mary Pat said, I had again a little version of what Mary Pat had. I didn't shut down Washington, D.C., but I did shut down Linnean Avenue, which is not a good thing. But I also agree, having had the experience when I worked at the Walters Art Museum, we had free times. And if you have free days, all year, you're not going to shut the place down because it's not making it into this bottleneck. But what we did find out when we had, you have a free Wednesday, who can come on free Wednesdays? Only people who don't need free Wednesdays, usually. So you really have to, as Mary Pat said, you have to work with people so that you're sure you're getting the free tickets to the people who really can benefit from having that. And we're talking about not only working with the various partners that you talk about, but certainly DC Public Schools and working through that, and also the libraries. The libraries are actually very good partners too. So, and it's not going to change, I think, this whole issue of, how do you fund our organizations? It's, as long as it's on kind of a big part of it is private philanthropy or gate revenues, that is what actually makes it, I think, pretty hard to run the organizations without that, a pretty significant public contribution as well.
Fred, let me bring in the data science here, because if in fact you segment your audience, and not just your existing audience, but also the audience that you'd like. And we mentioned outreach to school programs. Well, children should have access to the Guggenheim, to the Metropolitan Museum for free. So you have to orchestrate that, but you do that at a time where you don't crowd out other people who would be paying. Second, at the Guggenheim, more than half of our visitors each year pre-COVID were foreigners. They were tourists.
Right.
They were coming to New York City to, not only experience the art, but the architecture, the Frank Lloyd Wright building. They can afford to pay. So, we have them as a captive audience, but then what we got to do is say, okay, Harlem is just north of us. And how do we attract, that group, as well as from the other boroughs, from the Queens, Bronx, and other communities. And you actually have to have a plan, and then you have to, the way the Metropolitan Museum did, which is they abandoned, and it was thanks to negotiations with New York City, essentially, their previous policy, and they segmented it where, they have a very clear policy, and if you're a New Yorker, you get in for free. If you're below a certain age, you get in for free. But you got to segment, and you on the one hand, a lot of these institutions depend on the gate. They need the revenue to be able to keep going. So what you can't do is destroy your revenue base, but then you've got to be creative in saying, how do you, with available slots, make it affordable so that people who can't pay the $25 have access?
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, this is really interesting because this idea of audience and how do we ensure that there's diverse audiences at institutions is something that we're concerned about because it just focuses on the mainstream institutions and helping to diversify those institutions without looking at the larger sector that includes art spaces, places like the High Line, and great art spaces that are not the mainstream, and recognizing that diversity also includes strengthening those organizations. Those organizations of color across the spectrum of Latinx and Asian and indigenous organizations and African American are undercapitalized. Many of them forged during the civil rights era, but very fragile because they are not funded at the same level. They don't get the same visibility. They're not critiqued in the way that critics critique larger institutions. So I would just say to the question about the Melon survey, we have to remember that diversity includes strengthening other organizations led and facing other communities. I would just a footnote to say that Studio Museum of Harlem, I have to say, under now the leadership of Mary Schmidt Campbell, who now heads Spelman, and Larry Sims and Thelma Golden, that what started as a community arts organization and is now really mainstream itself, has cultivated more African American artists that are now working kind of at a global scale than any other institution, quite frankly. And they've cultivated more curators of color, like Naomi Beckwith and Franklin Sermons, who heads the Perez Museum, than any other institution in the country. But the lesson there is they've gotten a lot of support and are thriving now, but they're really one exception as an organization that is led by African American people and that sits in an African American community. So just want to make sure that when we talk about diversity, we make sure that we reflect all organizations, and that's for your next panel, Fred.
All of these challenges. Exactly. All these challenges are too big for 90 minutes. I guarantee it, but at least gets people thinking and talking about them, which is hopefully the point. I guess another aspect of that, if I will, and where you can see direct support to organizations founded by people of color or, from people who are not necessarily mainstream institutions, is they're probably not working from the same historical collections, if you will. And, part of the challenge, I would imagine, with historical institutions with existing collections is that you're essentially celebrating the past. And as we know, part of the problem of diversity is that in fact, the past has embedded a lot of these structures and injustices and inequities. And while you don't necessarily see that in an object of art or a painting or a sculpture or even a garden directly, maybe you do indirectly, but you don't see it directly, there is the challenge of underrepresentation, if you will, of artists from different backgrounds in sort of these institutions. Now, I think and suspect all of you are working as much as you can to try and change that, either perhaps if you've got a fixed collection, you can't do much, but you can put on special exhibitions and so forth. I'd be curious as to see what everyone thinks about that and how you can move that needle. Kate?
Well, yeah, I would love to speak to that in two different ways. And of course, we do have a fixed collection. Our collections were amassed by Marjorie Merriweather Post, and they're basically Russian imperial art and French 18th and 19th century. We do have, for example, a wonderful portrait by Karl Bruloff of Countess Samoylova, who it's an absolutely stunningly beautiful 19th century painting. of course, Countess Samoylova is striding into the room, and next to her is her Black servant, who is also stunningly beautiful, but clearly in, he is her servant, he's carrying her shawl and kind of looking up at her. Well, it's been very important for us that in the same room that we have that narrative, we also have a case that includes porcelain that has the image of Alexander Pushkin. So that you can, okay, there's a Black servant over here, but over here is the greatest Russian poet who ever lived, and he's of African heritage. And so you can kind of balance out that narrative and be able to, introduce a new narrative that is, here is someone brilliant and strong and, well known, that is African. So that's an important thing. And as you said, we're also looking to special exhibitions to sort of be able to broaden our reach. And we're introducing a wonderful California artist whose name is Christine Mays. She makes these incredible life-size wire sculptures. The exhibition is going to be called Rich Soil. It is 29 of these gigantic or life-size sculptures, but they were inspired by the Alvin Ailey revelations, fabulous. And so it gives us the opportunity not only to reach an audience through an exhibition committee, that was another wonderful experience, and people learning from each other, but it also allows us to have programming. And programming, having dancers come in. So we're commissioning a dance, piece that will be in response to the sculptures. And, I fully expect that will, really activate the sculptures and excite the audiences and so forth, and allow us to establish dance at Hillwood, which means that every year we will be able to have dance, and dance in the Washington, D.C. context is going to mean, Step Africa and Sankofa and all, other kinds of fantastic local talent that, again, it allows us to support these
That's
other
great.
organizations. And the other thing I have to say that I really want to do is to have our boards meet together. I want the board of Step Africa, the board of Dance Place, whatever, to come and, for example, use Hillwood as a place where they could meet, if that is of interest to them. And then I would very much want our board to be meeting their boards, because that's the other thing we need to do. I mean, they're going to want access to my board because they're going to want my board to be supporting their organizations, which absolutely they ought to be doing. But I'm going to be looking at their boards as potential members for our board to strengthen and diversify our board. So I just feel like there are a lot of really exciting opportunities and things we can do.
Absolutely. Tom, I guess I'll come to you because, again, I'm fascinated by your broad perspective. You've got your eyes into so many very different organizations, a few very large battleships, if you will, of history and culture, which are sort of moving and are takes a lot of energy and effort to steer them. But I'm also fascinated by the art foundation that you created yourself and installed a museum, as you were explaining to us, in Chelsea in view of the High Line, so that people out enjoying the High Line Park could actually look into the windows of the Hill Art Foundation and enjoy the art, and perhaps even come in and do that. And you've set it up as a free entry organization. Tell us a little bit about how you're trying to structure the foundation, the organization that you have, if you will, full control over to address some of these issues.
Well, location is very important, and it took me 10 years to find just the right spot. And again, if you're walking down the High Line, actually up from Gansevoort from the Whitney Museum, you can look into the 3rd and 4th floors and see the art in our foundation. Similarly, from inside, you look out on the High Line and the people walking up and down. So it gives you this wonderful feeling both inside but also outside. So the first thing is we chose that location because of the High Line. Second, we have a very active program where we hire high school kids, usually juniors and seniors from underserved communities. We pay them. They come 2 days a week. We kept the program going up until COVID. During COVID, we did online, and we're about to resume it, where we go to various communities and we say, who are students who are interested in art? They can spend 2 hours for 2 days a week, come to our art foundation, and we're going to give them access to a number of things. First, we're going to give them access to artists. And, if we have a show, for instance, Christopher Wool show, Christopher came and gave a talk. Same thing with Charlie Ray, same thing, Min Jung Kim. So these kids interested in art have an opportunity to interface with the artists. Second, we help them get jobs. Because we have a network where you've got lots of galleries in Chelsea, you've got lots of opportunities, we try to get them jobs, when they leave. Third, we have now developed a partnership with the Guggenheim Museum where, we are funding as part of our foundation a major educational program for underserved communities in New York City, where we're underwriting these kids coming into the Guggenheim, and then we get the benefit of having a window into what they're doing, and we can actually recruit them into our education program. So I would say it started with location, and then the education component is really critical. One thing that we haven't really talked about in terms of these institutions is you really need to actually go through formal training of your team to not only give them a window into where the opportunity sets are, but also sensitivity training around how they should be really aware of nuances in conversation. We talked about dress codes, but across the board, sensitizing people to embrace differences and to actually, celebrate the fact that, we now have an opportunity to be in dialogue with people coming from very different parts of New York City with different backgrounds. And but the training aspect is very important to our education. And we have formal training, and also at both the Guggenheim and at other institutions I've been involved with, the board is required to go through formal training, which I think is really important.
Yeah, can I just jump in for 1 second? I think I couldn't agree with you more in terms of the training of both the board and the staff, but the other group that needs training is the volunteers. A lot of our volunteers are older, not necessarily terribly diverse, and they need the training as well in terms of sensitivity and unconscious bias and all of that. So we're doing that as well.
Good point.
Sorry, I was muting the fire trucks. Sorry. Mary Pat, you, as you point out, are in a very diverse community, and you've got a relatively diverse audience, but you're surely facing many of the same challenges. And how do you address those things? And, how do you adapt in your particular needs for your institution?
It's constant. This is not, something we just started today, nor is it going to be ending tomorrow. It's a journey, and it's something you have to integrate it into the DNA of the organization. So, because even when you talk about training, it was reminding me of the work we've done with autistic children. And you really have to have your staff trained how to work with autistic children. And we are looking at whether we could be certified as a place for autistic children, which has layers to it. So there's so many layers to this whole thing. And, we're on the journey. We're not where we want to be on the journey. I think we've done really well with audience. And the next level of that is how do you get your audience to become or your visitors to become your members? So our membership is not as nearly diverse as our audience or our visitor base. And so we're working hard on that. And volunteers is another arena that I don't think we're even close to. So those to me are new challenges that are really exciting, because when your volunteers begin to look like the people who are visiting, then you really know you're getting where you need to be. But going back to membership, we did look at how we could do something meaningful in the community around equity and diversity with respect to membership 3 years ago. And we were fortunate we had a foundation that was looking at how to support equity, and they came and wanted us to do something that was like a beta test. We could develop a program and see how it worked. And the first thing everybody thought was it was just going to be free, come on in. And we wanted a deeper, more meaningful relationship with the people we were targeting. And so we ended up saying, we're on city property, we have a 50-year lease. And so it makes sense for us to want to give back to the community that the city that we are a partner to. And so we created a program called the Explorers Program that is a membership program targeted to the Atlanta Public School District, the employees of the city of Atlanta, Grady, which is our Trauma One hospital, and MARTA, which is our transit system in Atlanta. And we got a grant so that we could provide all of the staff of those organizations free membership to the garden. And the first year it was free, the second year it was $20, and it remains that. And now we have 5,000 households from those, from staff from those organizations in the city of Atlanta. And the highest uptick, of course, were the school teachers, because they had known of the garden for so long, because they come here with their children, their students, because we've done programming with them for so long. But we have firefighters and police officers and teachers and hospital workers who are all members now. And we do special events for them and really try to build a connection to them in a bigger, stronger way. And that's one way we've really diversified, because that group is probably 75% people of color. And in terms of, that most of our guests are like at demographic, their income is in the $100,000 range. Our Explorer members are in the $35,000 to $45,000 range. So we really hit our target with that program, and we're going to continue to expand that. So you just have to constantly be thinking and talking and working towards it in a strategic way so that you can hit the goals and do better.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, maybe I'd like to turn to a couple of the questions that people have submitted from the audience, if I may. Margaret, if I'll go to you first, which is, the question is really, you mentioned that Ford has partnered with Melon and the Alice Wallace Foundation and DEI training and digital database for board recruitment and so forth. How do you get other foundations to follow suit? How do you get a partnership, cooperation among foundations? Because clearly you're all powerful organizations. You've got thought leadership, moral leadership, and you have funding available for organizations that need it. Surely you should be able to drive it. I see an interesting parallel with Kate's comments of trying to create cross-fertilized boards among institutions themselves.
No, I love your thinking and your creativity, Kate, and I even have some other ideas for you. I appreciate that question right now, Fred. During the pandemic, our president, Darren Walker, was very concerned about our grantees across our work, not only the arts. I mean, there was a moment that we all really didn't know where the bottom was, I would think in March and April, and he challenged other foundations to actually spend beyond their threshold. He worked with our board to get an unprecedented bond issuance, so that we could really help to stabilize our current grantees, because we didn't know what was ahead. And that created an opportunity to look to those organizations of color that I mentioned earlier, that we selected 20 of them who've worked historically, and who've really made a difference in the landscape, and invested in them and brought other foundations in to really help to stabilize them. It was kind of a grand relief effort, and we focused on those 20 organizations. Bloomberg joined us in that, as well as Alice Walton, the Barr Foundation, and Hofstadter, and some others. But there's a second part to that, Fred, that we think is a model, and he actually reached out to other foundations across the country, gave them a matching grant, and challenged them to support organizations of color in their cities and states. And so we're partnering with 10 of those foundations across the country, gave them matching grants of, I believe, $3 million. They matched it, and they're creating their own 5-year programs to invest in organizations of color, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous led, and African American organizations, including the Getty Foundation and Houston Endowment and Heinz in Pittsburgh. And we formed with those foundations, and I'm sorry to leave some out here, but we formed a learning group that is continuing to really share practices about and how we are investing and helping to sustain those organizations, that will continue for the next several years. So that's just kind of one model that we're actually experimenting with, this idea of challenging others, helping them to build out that challenge, and then learning together in how do we help to sustain this group of organizations, and it's a practice that I know that we'll take to other areas of our work. It's called America's Cultural Treasures, that particular program. There's more information about it on our website.
That's great. Well, I'm reading a common theme among sort of the last half of our conversation here, which I will simplify simply because I'm a simple man, but it strikes me as education. That so much of what's happening now is trying to educate people about the challenges, but also about the resources available, about how they can work together to change things, about what they should be thinking the problems are, and what are the right methods. I mean, building strategic plans, as Tom said, and several of you said. It's such a large problem, right? It's such a big historical burden, if you will, that we're dealing with, and cultural institutions are only one part of society. Do you ever feel overwhelmed? How do you sort of fight the feeling of that this is you've got a finger in the dike and the flood is coming and the cracks are showing, and you don't know which hole to plug? I'm curious as to your reactions from that.
Let me start, Fred, where it's all about leadership. And if a leader feels overwhelmed for more than just 5 or 10 minutes, we're all susceptible to moments where, oh my goodness, that didn't go quite right, but we also have to bounce back. So if in fact our leaders are feeling overwhelmed, then we have the wrong leaders. And so what we have to do is be pretty objective and pretty tough. And again, when you look at how the leadership of the Ford Foundation under Darren Walker has, whether it's Detroit, whether it's the initiative around, I would say the jewels in cultural jewels around the country. It takes leadership. And so we wouldn't be where we are in the High Line without Robert Hammond. And, he's a Texas boy who comes to New
Great point.
York. He comes to New York, and against all odds, he creates Central Park in the sky. Negotiating with the city, with the major real estate developers, with the state. You can't imagine the obstacles to create this amazing institution. And, you may have seen Governor Cuomo now, wants to redo the Port Authority. We already got, 19 million square feet in Hudson Yards. They want to add another 20 million square feet around the Port Authority. And, and the High Line is going to be a critical component of making, Central Park in the sky go north. So it's all about leadership. And I think we don't do enough to actually encourage risk-taking. We don't do enough to actually say you're safe if you take these risks. And a board, has to, a board serves, one purpose, which is to have the right, strategic plan, and then to have the right people to execute. And, if you get the strategic plan wrong and you get the wrong people to execute, you're not going to accomplish it. And so it's both of those. But I think, we're now going to place an even higher premium on the leadership side because you can come up with great plans, but if you don't have the team to execute, you're nowhere.
That's great. That's great. I guess one last question. Have any of you seen, in your efforts along improving diversity across all these different dimensions, have you seen material resistance? Do you think there's a risk of backlash or anything along those lines? Clearly we're in a highly polarized society, and not everybody believes everything that everybody else believes, sometimes quite vocally. I'm just wondering as to whether you think that you're in a position in cultural institutions that you don't see much of that, or is it there, or is it something that you're worried about?
Well, if you think it's not there, then you're very unrealistic about the world we're living in today. The question is how to deal. And again, it goes to education and training and actually talking about it. And some of these conversations are really uncomfortable because, we got into this pickle because we didn't ask the tough questions. And so it's there and you just got to deal with it.
Tom, it's interesting you say that. We had one of the things we did at the, after George Floyd was murdered, and the world changed, I think, for a lot of white people who really just were not as aware as they should have been of something called systemic racism. And then, you start reading and, you can't not understand sort of how awful things have been. And then maybe you have been unaware of all these, what things have happened. But we started having conversations at the staff level about race. And have you seen racism at Hillwood? And what does it mean? And how do we combat it, and so forth? Well, before this year or last year, I would say people felt like the subject of race was taboo, and that they couldn't really talk about race to their, either people they worked with or their supervisor, whatever. And as soon as we started talking about it, people, felt, yes, very uncomfortable. It was very hard to start those conversations, but they did get started, and they did produce some very good outcomes, and people now do feel more comfortable talking about it and bringing issues up. And, you know, I think you just have to work through that discomfort, and you know, you can't always just feel great. You know, you're gonna not feel comfortable, and that's okay. You just have to be okay with it.
Thank you, Kate. I would say I think that we see a real earnest interest and effort across the board, you know, to really want to make change. My concern, though, is that there are a lot of different practices and strategies out there across a very wide landscape. And I'm not sure that all of these things work. I believe this problem is really a top-down problem that will not be solved unless the C-suite, I think it really starts with the C-suite. Certainly curators and chief curators are critical, but I believe we really need to start with the C-suite, and I think that not enough efforts are focused there, and not enough institutions are focused there. They're focused on audience and a lot of other things, but I think that unless we really change the top leaders in the C-suite, we're going to be in the same place in a few years.
Margaret, I agree completely, but it also is broader and encompasses the board. And
yeah, I agree. I should have said that.
You know, at the Guggenheim, when we added Rashid Johnson, not only to the board, but to the inner circle of decision making on the executive committee, all of a sudden
That had an impact, right?
Things changed, where we were hearing things very different. And he was giving us direct feedback and saying, hey, you know, here's reality. And it was so useful because, you know, you're right, Kate, a lot of people just didn't know, but they should have known.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So, but, you know, having somebody there to remind you,
I agree with you, Tom.
you know, like Rashid, I mean, he's just made all the difference in the world, but we got to have more of that.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Well, this has been terrific. We're coming up on our 90 minutes here soon, so I don't want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I hope all of you listening and watching have been as impressed and have learned as much today as I have. This has been a terrific panel. I really, really appreciate everybody's contribution. Kate, Margaret, Mary, Pat, Tom, thank you very much for allocating time out of your busy days to come join us and talk about this important issue. This is, we think education is really important. That's why we do these things, and educating people about social issues is, I think, one of the critical things we need to do. Not everything, you have to act once you learn, but learning can often be the first step. So we're really pleased that you were able to join us. We're delighted that you could all come, and all of you in the audience as well. And so what I'll just do is give you a little wrap up here. You can learn more about what we're doing at the National Institute at our website, socialsciencesinstitute.org. All kinds of information set up. This is the first of several webinars we're going to be having throughout the year. So please stay tuned for what's coming next. But delighted to have you come today, and hope that we see you again back in the future at another one of these events.
Fred, thanks so much for including me.
Thank you. It's nice to meet all of you.
Thank you all for joining, and
thank
you again for your contribution.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye now.
Thank you.